Okay. So today's conversation, as always, we go in through the weekly Torah portion. And the weekly Torah portion this week, probably half of it, a little more than half, has the cycle of Jewish holidays. So this is a reading that actually we read on Passover, we read it on Sukkot, because it mentions all the holidays. And it goes through each one individually. Quickly. And today we're going to get into the Sukkot holiday, although it's not Sukkot and it's we're just after Pesach, but we're going to get into some of the lessons of the Sukkot holiday, specifically of the four species. On Sukkot we take a lulav, and the lulav has bound to it two other species. One is a willow, one is a myrtle, and then the esrog, citron, and that's one of the biblical mitzvahs of the holiday. What is the end game of today's conversation? The end game of this conversation is talking about the Jew, and I guess partly within the arena we spoke about. This is what's on our minds, I assume, at least what's on my mind, is the craziness that's been going on in the streets and on the universities. And while I don't have any direct knowledge, the idea that I've read that there are Jews bankrolling these anti-Israel protests, George Soros, Pritzker, it's very concerning to me. I don't know if it's true, but it's in the press.
Well, it's not direct. It's
they give to Touch
give
Foundation.
money to organization,
Yeah.
One organization, then another one, and this organization, and so on.
So there, you can say they didn't mean to. George Soros, in particular, I don't know anything about the Pritzkers. George Soros has come out with comments over the past few decades that are very not pro-Israel, and so he's while I don't know, it's something that I'm inclined to think is somewhere within the realm of the true.
Now, he also disliked by all the dictatorial regimes like Russia or Hungary and so on. So where he's trying to bring the groups to bring a democracy in those countries.
Great.
Right. So, but we worry about Israel.
We're worried about Israel. Yeah, I'm worried about Israel. I'm worried about other things also. I'm worried about Israel. But that's top of the heap.
Soros is a threat to Israel.
I don't know if he's a threat to Israel, but a prominent Jew speaking, and a wealthy Jew, makes him prominent, speaking in ways that don't seem to me to be in favor of Israel or are really undermining Israel's place in people's consciousness. It's not a good thing. Now, what would I do? I was actually thinking about this over the weekend. What would happen if George Soros showed up here for shul? What would he be? I'd give him a siddur and a chair.
Well, you said you will give a
and gefilte fish.
You give a siddur to a killer rabbi from South Jersey.
Yeah, I would. I may not give him an aliyah, right? But so you're used to it already. But from a perspective of what do you do? I guess we could talk about Jews who we perceive, because we can never know what's going on in someone's life, as these are quote unquote good Jews. Then you have Jews who they don't show up, but they're not doing any damage that we can see. And then there's the George Soros type. I take it to an extreme to the George Soros type. There is there would be an understandable feeling by some people on the side who watch to say, why would you allow someone like that into shul? They forfeited their Jewishness. Let's say we knew for sure that George Soros was, or there's some anonymous Jew who's bankrolling and actively organizing these protests. Say you're slapping the Jewish people in the face. It's true.
Or it could be a bloodline.
But let's say we knew. Let's say we knew.
Okay.
Let's say we knew. Forget the George Soros, because I don't want to talk about it because I don't know. But let's say it was someone who we did know. Then one could say, well, how can you let someone like that in here? And the answer would be, because how do I not let them in here? But I could understand there might be some places that would say, don't come in here. There's this idea of measuring, based on what we can see, the actualizing of someone's Jewish identity, and therefore, and using that to assess their essential Jewish identity. So just this morning, I happened to see, and it fits in with this, I happened to see a story that in 1967, a few months after the Six-Day War, there was, and in Israel, there was I don't know the name, but just reading the story, there was a very well-known Jewish Marxist in Israel named Meir Wilner, Israeli Marxist. And there certainly was more than one of those, but he was very vocal and very vocal against the very idea of there being a Jewish state. And after 67, when everyone was on a high, came close to Rosh Hashanah, he had a speech, and he really was very vicious about the Jewish state and what we're doing to the poor Arabs, and he was advocating this is his Marxist ideal. Unfortunately, it sounds like from the story I read, there was a Holocaust survivor who waited for him outside his house and stabbed him with a penknife. Terrible. It wasn't such a terrible wound. He went to the hospital, he came back home. Someone else wrote in an article in Yediot Achronot, Israeli paper, saying the shame about this is that it wasn't a longer blade. And this was a pretty well-known writer. He happened to come shortly afterwards, came to Crown Heights to spend the holidays, at least part of the holidays. He wasn't not a Chabad guy, but he was coming to the United States, and he came to Crown Heights. He passed by the Rebbe, passed by him as he was walking to shul, and the Rebbe stopped and said, "It's not the way to write about a Jew." And let's get together over the next few days. So he was taken aback. He went to the Rebbe's secretary, said, I need an appointment. He said, there's no appointments now. It's Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, there's no appointments. He said, the Rebbe told me that let's get together over the next few days. They said, you know something? Maybe he means there's going to be a gathering of Febring, and you can come to the gathering. You can sit there. Just getting together with the Rebbe. There's absolutely there are no appointments now. So he did go. And there, the Rebbe spoke a bit about, it's not along the lines of what we're going to talk about now, about the value of the Jew. Think about it as family. If I have a brother or sister, and God forbid, they're really making horrible choices, and maybe they're making horrible choices against my own family, and maybe I don't even want to talk to them because they're doing something so horrible to my parents, so it's still my brother or my sister. And I would hope that if I were in that situation, that if they're in need, I would want to help take care of them. I might still need to send my message of about their misdeeds. It doesn't mean that their misdeeds aren't misdeeds, but a brother's a brother, sister's a sister, and we never want to forget that. And that goes for our larger family.
So you would let the Marxist guy from Israel into the shul?
Absolutely.
And the members of Naturei Karte as well.
If they agree to keep their mouth shut, yeah. And I wouldn't allow people in here and give them the ability to spout what I consider to be offensive ideas. The president of Students for Justice in Palestine is also welcome to come here, but they're not getting a platform, and they're not going to get an aliyah either, probably. because but they're Jews. So what I'm going to get into, and again, I'm giving much a preface because to get into this. As we're going to read here, and as I'm sure you've all heard, the Medrash talks to us about the four species of the lulav and the esrog as each reflecting different types of Jews. The esrog has a good taste and a good smell. I mean, that symbolizes someone who excels in Torah and in good deeds. The lulav has it's a date palm. Dates have a good taste, but not a good smell. That symbolizes someone who excels in Torah study. I can explain why each one is correlated, reflects the other, but that reflects someone who excels in Torah study, but not in good deeds. The myrtle has a good smell and not a good taste, not a taste. That symbolizes someone who excels in what they do and the good smell they bring to the world, but not in Torah study. And then there's the willow that has neither a good smell nor a good taste, and it symbolizes someone who doesn't excel in either. So before we get into this, what comes to my mind, and some of you may have, if you've been around for a couple of decades, probably heard this from me before. When I was a student, I went. I had one of our teachers he passed away a few years ago. Incredible mind. He had so much information in his head, and from unlikely sources, Torah sources. And I was sitting with him once, and I said something to him about the Chabad perspective on life, in contradistinction to other observant Torah perspectives. And he said to me, "You have to grow up. It's not just because it's yours, it's right, the other guys are wrong. To look at the Torah and look at how things are addressed in Torah and see, what you value and why you value it." Okay. So he said to me, "Why do you think it is that we have for Sukkot, the first 6 days, the mitzvah is we take the lulav and the esrog, make a blessing, and we'll try to get you to do it too, and it's all four together. On the 7th day, we do the same thing, but then we have a special service, which is like a cap and Yom Kippur. It's a very focused, earnest service, and for that we use just the arav, just the will, not to fail the other three." So did you ever think of it? Why would you use the simplest of the four? I said, I never thought of that. Good question. See, he sends me off to the library to bring a book, very well respected book of non-Chabad Hasidim. It's actually Malki's ancestor, Rabbi Melech Lezhensk. I never looked at it before. I wasn't not reading it, but it's not my team. And I'm almost 17 also. I have a limited experience. So he brings it to me and he shows me this. Rabbi Melech asked the question. So cool. So he says, "What is the answer?" So I look at it. The answer is that after on the 7th day of the willow, hanging out, it's already been a week, hanging out with the esrog and the myrtle and the lulav. It has absorbed some of that beauty, and now you can use the arav on its own. So, okay. Then he sends me into the library to bring a book from also a man who has since passed away, but he was from your friends, the Lithuanian style,
the educated ones.
Yeah. So he asked the question also. He says, and here he shows me. So, and what does he answer? This man says, there's a service in that service where we walk around with the arav, we walk around with the lunesrik, but then we use the arava, we select the arava for its special service. One of the is we bang it on the ground 5 times at the end. And that's Kabbalistic reasons, so that they're not for the scope here. So this rabbi writes, what do you do? You take the Rav, what do? You bang him on the ground. Because it represents the person who doesn't excel in Torah or mitzvahs. So, which I found offensive even at 17. So then he said, now look at the Rebbe also wants to address this. And the Rebbe addressed the beauty that comes with simplicity. And how we find in earlier generations, Kabbalists who would pray for the simplicity of a child. Because sometimes you know a lot, all the sophistication gets in the way. You're looking at your child. Why you love them this, love them that? You love them because they're your child. And that simple answer doesn't show up necessarily. Or your brother or your sister, whatever it is. So here we're going to focus on the beauty of just the being, where someone you can't see exactly what they're contributing, but it doesn't really make a difference because they don't have to earn your respect. So now let's get started. Go on text 1. Text 1 is from this week's Torah portion. It's on page 21. Oops. Yeah. Okay. So what we have here is the Torah verse that tells us to take the 4 species of the lulav and the esrog. It doesn't say lulav. It doesn't say esrog. It actually doesn't say any of the 4 species by name. It's, you shall take for yourselves on the first day a beautiful fruit of a tree, which, you know, if it's subjective, we could all take one could take a peach, another one could take an apple, but this is something where we know this means an esrog through our tradition. Date palm fronds, a branch of a dense-leaved tree, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before your God for 7 days. Now, why isn't Torah just give us straight up the names? Because the way these are each framed, they give us, teach us different nuances of the laws. And as I've said before, the Torah was given with an oral component, which we knew this right away meant esrog, but the way it's framed teaches us something. So now we're not going to get too much into that, but we want to try to understand a little bit. Let's take a look at text 2. Use esrog as an example. There's no maximum limit to the size of an esrog. This is in the Code of Jewish Law. It is valid even if it is so big that it must be carried on one shoulder. There is, however, a minimum limit. It cannot be as small as a peanut. An esrog smaller than the size of an egg is invalid. Why? Because most esrogim grow to no less than the size of an egg. So what does that have to do with anything? If that's the norm, the fact that the esrog has not grown to that size shows that it's not fully grown. And the Torah's expression, fruit of a tree, implies a fruit, something that's already a fruit. It's not almost a fruit that is complete. So the Torah starts to define, it's not just an esrog. It has to be, for example, an esrog has to have, there's certain, one of the things that has to be, it says it calls it beautiful, which means it shouldn't be dried out. It starts to tell us that it's not every esrog. There are parameters. Same thing with the lulav, which is text 3, page 22. The term date palm fronds connotes a lulav. This is also from the Code of Jewish Law that grows on a date palm. Since the Torah used the term in the Hebrew, it's kapot tamarim, which is a funny language. It should have said leaves of a date palm, which in Hebrew would be ale tamarim. The word kapot, it could mean, especially since the Torah is written without vowels, could mean that it's bound. So we learned the lesson, the leaves must be such that can be brought together and bound together with a spine. There's a spine in the lulav, in that date palm, because they're still pliable. That because eventually they get the leaves get very hard. They have to be pliable enough to be able to be tied together. This concept is derived because vowels are not written in Torah, and the term kaput could also read kafut, which means bound. It can happen that the lulav remains on the date palm until its leaves become as stiff as wood, and they spread out and became separated from the spine. As the stiffer they become, the more they spread away from the spine. In such a case, we determine that if the leaves have become so firm that they can no longer be bound together with the spine, have become so firm they can no longer be bound together with the spine. If this is indeed the case, the lulav is invalid. So the reason they're bringing this is trying to say that it's not just a date palm or a citron. There are rules. Not every citron is going to be able to be used. Not every date palm is going to be able to be used. Well, let's go to Hadas, the myrtle. Text 4. Hadas is not considered dense-leaved until at least 3 leaves emerge from a single point. On the branch, one area, there's to be 3 leaves coming out. 3 or more leaves are positioned next to each other in a circle around the stem, none of them being lower than the other. Even though they do not emerge from a single root, if they are close to each other and stand on an equal plane in one circle, they are considered as dense-leaved. If, however, 2 leaves stand on an equal plane, very close to each other, and the 3rd leaf emerges on a higher level than the other 2, or emerges on a lower level than the other 2, and ascends and lies on them, this is not considered dense-leaved. Rather, such a species is called a crazed myrtle. It's not. I mean, that's their translation. It means it's a foolish myrtle. In other words, it's not. It's not a full myrtle. It is invalid throughout the 7 days of the festival. Even in a pressing situation where no other myrtle twig can be found, it should not be used, even without reciting a blessing, for it does not belong to the same species as a valid myrtle. All of these texts, up to text 4, are meant to establish that when it comes to the laws to using a citron, a palm frond, a myrtle, we see that there are specific laws. You can't just go out to your backyard and say, hey, I have a citron tree. I can use that citron. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You have to look at the laws. The myrtle and the lulav the same way. Interestingly, the willow is different. When it comes to onarava, which is the willow, it has to be a willow. If its top was severed, or its leaves were torn, or if it's what's called a tzaftfa, a species similar to but not actual willow, is invalid. We got rules too. But if it's slightly dried, or some of its leaves fell off, or if it grew in a veal, remember, and what it said is the language of the Torah was that it is a willows of the brook. So you think it has to come from near a brook? No, they generally go by the brook. It's in your backyard. We have actually a willow tree in the back that we've planted in the back of our parking lot. It's not by a brook. It's kosher. So it seems that we're much more flexible when it comes to the restrictions and the disqualifications of the willow, as in contradistinction to the other 3. When it says in a field, you can take it in a field, meaning that an arava that grows in a field and not by a brook is kosher, even though the Torah says clearly, arvei nochel is the Hebrew word of the willows of the brook. Why don't you just stick what the Torah says? Why are we so lax there? And here we find from Code of Jewish Law, which is page,
Text 6.
Yeah, it's text 6, page 25. The willows of the brook that the Torah speaks of refers to a specific species that is known by that name. It's called willows of the brook. Don't get hung up on such particulars. It doesn't make a difference if it's by a brook. It's one of those things that generally they're called brook willows. Has an elongated leaf, similar to a brook. The edges of its leaves are smooth, and it has a red stem. This species mostly grows by a brook, which is why it's called willows of the brook. However, even if it grew in the desert or in the mountains, So here they're trying to establish that we are much more lenient with restrictions on what makes for a kosher arava. Almost anything is a kosher arava.
So in other words, if it grows by a pond, even if it's not running water, it's valid.
And even if it's not near any water. In the desert, it says. And in text 7, the verse states, willows of the brook. From where do we arrive? And this is from the Gemara, the Talmud. From where do we arrive that even willows from a field or from a mountain are valid? The verse's usage of the word willows means many different willows are kosher. Even though it also says brook. We're going to ignore that part. We derive that willows are valid in any case. So here, the real question here is why the leniency with when it comes to the willow, the arava. Now let's go a little further. Here it's page 26 and text 8, and they call it ginos and winos. What is this? Our sages tell us, this is from an article on Chabad.org, that the Torah can be interpreted in 4 different general ways. Pshat, Remez, Drush. So before we go further with this, Torah is very complex. It's very approachable on the simple interpretation end, but you can read it in many keys. And reading in different keys opens up totally different worlds. So generally speaking, we talk about 4 different keys, 4 different planes which you can understand Torah. One is the simple text. One is hints that are in there, which you think, well, how did they come up with that? But they are legitimate hints, and the Talmud, our rabbis have spoken about for thousands of years that they're in there. Then there's something which we call drush, which is like the medrash, where it's the rabbis expounding exegetical, they call it, or homiletic interpretations, and then there's the kabbalistic. Those are 4. So he's going to go through this a little bit. He said there are 4 general ways. Okay. Pshat, them is drusha. Let's unpack that. Number 1, pshat is the simple interpretation of the Torah. And let's start from the beginning of the Torah. When the verse says at the very beginning of the Torah, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What does that mean? What's the lesson? It's very clear. God created heaven and earth. There's not, which word don't you understand? It means exactly what it seems to mean, a very literal sense. That's true. Torah means what it says on a literal level. When you dig a little bit, and you have the knowledge to read this in a different key. We'll go to the second level, remez. Remez means like a hint or a secret. Remez is the different hints and illusions which are contained within the Torah. It's not the simple interpretation, but it'll tell you something. For example, one of the methodologies the Torah employs to make these hints is gematria, the numerical value of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This may have come up in our prior conversations. There is a whole field of study where gematria, we don't have this in English. A is A, B is B. A doesn't have any numerical, I don't think, any numerical value unless you're using it in algebra. It's nothing specific to A. Aleph has the numerical value of 1. Bet has a numerical value of 2. And therefore, every word, you look at it, it actually has a numerical value because the components that make up a word are also numerical components. We don't think of it that way because you're reading words and you're looking at letters, but actually you can see it as a speaking to us in numbers. That's called gematria. Numerical value of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So, for example, the gematria, if you take the Bereshit bara, which the 2 words mean in the beginning God created, that is those words, which are 8 letters. In the beginning, God created those letters the same as B'Rosh Hashanah Nivra Olam. The Talmud tells us that the phrase the world was created on Rosh Hashanah, which the Torah doesn't tell us. Those words, Rosh Hashanah Nivra Olam, that God, that on Rosh Hashanah the world was created, has the exact same numerical value as in the beginning God created. Why is that? The Talmud says it's because it's trying to tell you from on a hinting level that when you read God created, when was it created? Rosh Hashanah. That's why a lot of our liturgy, Rosh Hashanah, is about creation of humanity. Okay, so now we got the Rebbe's. Now let's go a little bit further. It says Bereshit Bara Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah Nivra are both 116. The next one, Drush, the third, which are like, that's where the word for Medrash is. What does it mean? It's an expounding of the deeper meaning of the verse. The Hebrew word for in the beginning is Bereshit. This Medrash tells us, that this word can be split into two words, Bereshit, or Beis, Bet Reshit. Just split the word. What's Bet Reshit? Bet is two. There are two, and Reshit means first. There are two firsts. There are two primary goals of God in creating the world. Torah is telling us that the world was created for two firsts, two primary purposes, Jews and Torah. Although this is not the simple interpretation of the word, nevertheless, and it is a true and valid way of understanding the Torah. And the primary commentary on the Torah, Rashi, actually brings that in his interpretation of this word, even though that's not a literal. Number 4, Sod, the Kabbalistic, is the esoteric, mystical part of the Torah. The Zohar, a book which gives 70 different esoteric explanations for the word Bereshit, explains that the word Bereshit can be split into Bara Shis. If you split it in a certain way and you read it in the Aramaic, it's created with 6. This is because it's reflecting, it's telling us that the world was created through God's 6 emotional, what we call Sephirot, godly energy, divine energies, kindness, severity, beauty, victory, splendor, and foundation. That's their translation.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
Tikkun obviously relates to tikkun, which means mending or binding.
Now, it definitely could mean that. Tikkun also it means like pillars also. So more in the Aramaic, it could also mean beautifying. So it's meant that in that sense more, but it's part of the Zohar. So this, we have 4 different ways of looking at the Torah, and even Rashi, as I mentioned before, text 9, sometimes he'll say this verse demands a midrashic explanation, because even though I can give it to you in the literal, it's even for a kid, it's not going to make that much sense. I have to help you with the midrashic. Okay, so now that being the case, let's take a look at what the Medrash tells us about these 4 species, and I mentioned it already. But now let's go over it. Text 10. Oops. Okay. Text 10. When the Torah says a beautiful fruit of a tree, remember the verse brought 4 different species and phrased them in interesting ways. A beautiful fruit of a tree, this refers to Israel. Just like a citron has good taste and good smell, so too Israel has among them people who possess Torah and possess good deeds. Everybody has possessed, but it means excels in Torah and excels in good deeds. Date palm fronds, this refers to Israel. Just like a date which has taste and no smell, so too Israel has among them those who excel in Torah, but do not excel in good deeds. A branch of a dense leaf tree, this refers to Israel. Just like a myrtle which has smell and has no taste, so too Israel is among them those who excel in good deeds, but do not excel in Torah. And finally, willows of the brook, this refers to Israel. Just like a willow which has no smell and no taste, so too Israel has among them people who don't excel in Torah, nor do they excel in good deeds. So there's 4 different personality types. And the arava, we said the willow, is that, let's call it the simple Jew. So here's a perspective from the Rabbi. We unite the Aravot. In other words, it's on Sukkot is a unity holiday. You bring the lulav, which Herson excels in Torah, the Esrog excels in both, the willow, the myrtle excels in mitzvahs, together with the Rav. We're all together. You can't make a bracha on just three of them. You have to have all four. We unite together with Jews who don't excel neither Torah or good deeds just because they're Jews. Simply being a Jew is an essential intrinsic quality that every Jew possesses by virtue of being a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is true even if in practice they possess neither Torah nor good deeds. In fact, even if they are completely assimilated and don't even know they are Jewish. I've met people like that. So, and that person is no less a sibling of mine than anyone else. What if I have someone here who is a Jew who's a devout Catholic? I actually have to be careful about saying blessings with them, because who they have in mind for the blessings, not who I have in mind for the blessing, the way they see God. But they're no less Jewish than me. There will be, we're going to see the world differently. We're going to see our Jewish identity differently. But that Jew who's a devout Catholic is no less Jewish than I am. Remember, I may have mentioned this also in the past. There's years ago, one of our preschool families came to my house Friday night. It's a good Catholic last name, a good Catholic, a Catholic married to a Jew, and they came to my house, and we start talking, and we're having just food, and we're schmoozing, and then he mentions relatives, a great uncle, and what was his great uncle's name was Max Shapiro. I go, how do you get to Shapiro? Says, it's my grandmother's brother. Grandmother's brother? So your grandmother's Jewish? My grandmother's Catholic. My grandmother goes to mass every day. I said, I didn't ask that. They come from the same mother? But Shapiro, was Max's mother Jewish? I said, yeah, they were Jews. So I said, so this is his mother's mother, is with an Irish Catholic last name, and she sees herself as Catholic, but technically he's Jewish. I'm sitting by the Shabbos table because he was actually saying, maybe I would convert because I don't really care too much about Catholicism, and maybe for the family. I said, you don't need to convert. You're Jewish. So we went through the whole process, and he got excited. He wanted to make a bar mitzvah, and because he had been baptized, it's not by Jewish law, but the tradition is that he goes to the mikveh. He doesn't have to convert, but he has to, because he didn't. He's Jewish, but there's this idea of rebirth. So I was trying to get guidance on this because I'd never done it before. So I'm calling a senior rabbi or two. Can't catch them. So I called someone I'd never called, but he's pretty well known. He's written many books. He's in Borough Park. He's not from Chabad, but he hangs out with Chabad. He's a Satmar, but he has a feeling for Chabad. Figure I'll call him, and I called him on the phone. So he says to me, so I said to him, he's going to the mikveh. I just want to make sure that he doesn't have to make a blessing. So he says, what he's going? So what is he? Tell me the story. So I explained to him. He said, what are you doing? So I said, the guy's Jewish. He goes, did he become observant? I said, no. So he said, so what? She said, what are you doing? I said, because the guy's Jewish. So he said, but he's not observant. I said, should I not put tune on him? So why are you asking me questions? I said, let me ask you a question. Another question. If he was in a building, the law is that a Kohen is not allowed to touch any corpse. They can go to funerals for immediate family, but they're not supposed to go to funerals. They don't go to the cemetery. That's a Kohen thing. They're not allowed to touch any corpse. Jew or non-Jew. They're not allowed to be in the same building as a Jewish corpse. So in other words, if Mr. Cohen walks in here and unfortunately someone passed away and it's my Catholic friend who's in the next room, the Cohen has no problem being here. If it's a Jewish friend, he's not supposed to be in the building. So I asked this rabbi, I said, let me ask you a question. If this guy, God forbid, passes away, does the Cohen have to leave the building? And he says, he was quiet for a little bit. He said yes, and he slammed the phone on me. I didn't want to talk anymore. But because law is the law. Of course he's Jewish. She's saying so. He was his mother is a practicing Catholic, his grandmother's a practicing Catholic. He was baptized Catholic. Okay, if it offends your senses, I get that. But he's Jewish. So this is what we're saying here. I mean, we're not going that far as a practicing Catholic. This is true. It's that even in practice, even if they're completely similar, don't even know they're Jewish, or even worse. And here's a thought, text 12, a nice idea from a non-Chabad rabbi. In Poland, in the early 20th century, a few Jewish students were allowed to attend medical school. Only a few. The only catch was they had to supply their own Jewish cadavers to study on. After all, it would not befit a Polish cadaver to help a Jewish student. They had to protect the Poles from the Jews, even when they're dead. Familiar with the problem in Jewish law of dissecting Jewish bodies, the students approached the foremost halachic authority of the time. His name was Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grodzinski. A great genius, not a Hasidic man, but a great rabbi. They proposed that in order to gain entrance to medical school, they be allowed to use the bodies of deceased Jews of ill repute or criminals. So you have to have respect for dead bodies, for corpses. These are criminals. Maybe we can dissect them in school. The rabbi, after recovering from the shock of the suggestion, responded, for me to allow that, I have to know what God thinks about these people. It's not what we think. These are, he's saying is you're getting into God's business. They're Jewish. You can't, even if they're criminals, even if they have done horrible things, we can't mess around with them.
So based on that, even now, a Kohen could not become a physician.
There's a lot of questions about that. It depends what kind of physician. I think that in most cases, if a Kohen is going to become a dermatologist or ophthalmologist, these are things we're really not dealing with.
But they all go through the same basic training.
There's definitely a problem with cadavers. There's no question. And Kohen students don't do that. Those who are careful about it. There are Kohen doctors, but they have to make different allowances, get different allowances, and actually being in the hospital is an issue because of the morgue. But they're always around it. I know I have a friend who's a Kohen who very much, he's an EMT and he wanted to be an EMT. And he is an EMT, but he had to get guidance as to if he's about dealing with people who are close to death. He's got to take a step back. Okay. All right, text 13.
So how did they solve this problem in Poland?
I don't know. We can Google it later.
Probably use the Muslim bodies.
The Poles wouldn't have minded.
I know.
Text 13. This is from a quote from the founder of the Hasidic movement, Baal Shem Tov. It says, we must love and cherish the simplest Jew as much as the greatest scholar. Just because he or she is a Jew, we all have one father. You're all children of God, and I love you, says God. This is one of the things that the Hasidic movement brought to the collective Jewish table that offended some people, but was a core belief of the Hasidic movement is that we don't get to decide who deserves respect and love. We can say, something, you're doing something so helpful. I can see that aside from the basic love and respect, I have respect for what you're doing. You say you're doing something so detrimental. Let's say I don't like what you're doing, but who you are, you're a Jew. You're my brother and my sister, and that goes to the idea of not just having respect to his language, also to love them, even if we knew. I know George Soros seems to be a raw nerve with you, but
Absolutely not.
no, okay. But if George, even if I knew for sure what they're claiming about George Soros is true, and certainly I don't have to go to him. There are people with names and addresses who I know, and they're Jewish, who have been in specific universities who have been advocating for these anti-Israel things. There's no question about it. There are people. So I find the action despicable, actually, but doesn't make them despicable. They're misguided. They're wrong. Maybe they're even criminal. Some of, but there are brothers and sisters. There are people. There are Jews.
Please advance the page.
Back a couple of readings to the rabbi who said, I have to consult with God about that.
Yeah, right. and we should know that it's a hubris for us to think we can assess based on what we know. We can assess someone's value as a human being or as a Jew. That's what kind of arrogance is that? I don't know. If I know this person murdered someone, I know they've done something horrible, horrendous. I don't know how they're feeling about it now. I don't know whether they've tried to if they're feeling terrible remorse. I can only deal with what I see on the ground. And sometimes we put people. There was capital punishment in Judaism. We didn't say, "Whoa, listen, there are fellow brothers and sisters. They did something." Sometimes there was capital punishment, but even that was done like we're giving capital punishment to a brother or sister. There was no torture. We had, the idea of that this is our brother or sister works its way into the Talmudic conversations about how to go about this, because if it's a necessary thing, the Torah says it, then we're going to do it. But still, it's not. This is something they recognize. This is our brother or sister. Okay, I'm sorry I didn't bring this one up. It's text 13. Love and cherish the simplest Jew as much as the greatest scholar, just because he or she is a Jew. And you can imagine that this didn't fly good with some of the scholars, but that was the Mashontif. And finally, text 14, the last of the texts today, from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in one of his talks. He says, our teacher, the Baal Shem, spoke very much about three loves. That of a fellow Jew, love of the Torah, and love of God, thereby exposing the essence of what a Jew is. The legal portion of Torah may declare a certain Jew as unfit. For example, gamblers are unfit to give testimony. In Torah law, personal gambling, because it's seen as a compulsion, we're talking about a couple thousand years ago, they were considered not in control of their moral perspective, and therefore a gambler was not believed. It was not believed in testimony before a court. And there are others. A murderer wouldn't be either. And there are certain Jews after whose blessings we don't answer Amen, like a Catholic a Jew who's practicing Catholicism. I'm thinking God, but they're thinking Jesus. So I'm not going to answer Amen. However, according to the soul of Torah, every Jew is inherently good. There may be layers of not good, but the inherent essence. All Jews are responsible for one another. No one has the liberty to say, I'm a scholar, I'm a pious man who puts on 3 pairs of tefillin. Why should I bother with someone else? Just as 2 partners will tell one another, look, we're in this together. Whatever's your business is my business, and there's no such thing as fighting against each other. So must it be with every Jew. And that's all they're saying, is that Torah is telling us by saying, go easy. What is the Torah telling us with going easy on the Erevim? See, you judge by what you see. I see the esrog, it's plump, it's good, it has no blemishes, I could use it. It's dried, I can't use it. The lulav, If it's pliable, it's good. If not, we make judgments by what we see. That's human. When it comes to a Rava, we say, don't worry so much about what you see. It's an Rava. It's not the Rava by the brook. It's a Rava there. It's okay. Because, in other words, it eases our judgmental perspective, which is necessary. You have to be judicious. When it comes to assessing the value of a Jew, don't be so judicious. And let's look at the key points. Get this out of the way. The Torah commands us to take 4 species on the holiday of Sukkot. They are the lulav, the esrog, the hadas, and the arav. Number 2, although the first 3 species must match the Torah's description of them, an arav is valid even if it doesn't grow near a brook as the Torah describes. In other words, don't get hung up on some of the seeming restrictions. Number 3, the first 3 species represent the Jew who is actively involved in Torah mitzvahs, or excels, or at least one of the 2. Therefore, they're defining their characteristics must be actively present. Number 4, the Arava represents the Jew who is not actively involved in Torah mitzvahs. Therefore, the Arava's defining characteristics do not have to be actively present. As long as it is a willow and could theoretically be a brook willow, it's valid. Number 5, the Arava Jew, which and actually when he did the what they put in here is a gyno. They meant the gyno as a Jew in name only. So there's really no such thing. The Arava Jew is as integral to the Jewish nation as the Rav is integral to the 4 species. They're one of us, and if God created them, they're necessary. The Arava Jew's value as a Jew is inherent. Every Jew is an equal member of God's chosen people. Leave that there. If there are any questions?
What is one?
A wino was a willow in name only. They made that up. You're not the wino from the. You're grimacing at their sense of humor, or at the wino? Or
No, I didn't, okay, Jew in name only, but I didn't know what they meant by
Yeah,
one.
yeah. They're trying to compare the 2. That it's we need to be careful, and and I've gotten calls from some parents who say, they're mortified. Their kid is on campus at the anti-Israel encampment. They're your kid. You gotta love them, try to educate them, hug them. They're kids, and they got swept up in something. They're being manipulated, probably. Obviously, try to hold them close, but I remember one person specifically. They were fighting about it. So why are you fighting with your kid? You're not going to change their mind. Agree not to speak about it. And when your child calms down, is a little more sane frame of mind, you can start educating them. All right. Wish you all a great week.